We're very fortunate to have Marilyn Hein here, someone who really knows a lot about preservation. She lives in Appleton, but grew up in Sturgeon Bay and still really considers Door County her home. Many of you might recognize her from learning and retirement programs, where she teaches classes at all of the Fox Valley Technical College sites and in Sturgeon Bay. Both sets of Marilyn's great-grandparents were among the first Door County settlers in the late 1800s, when the lumbering industry was just booming. Her father's grandparents, William and Wilhelmina Hein, bought the property now known as Heins Creek. Her mother's grandparents, Lincoln and Carolyn Erskine, bought property in Jacksonport, now known as the Erskine Rest Area. Am I pronouncing that right? Mm-hmm. Thank you. They also owned land along County Trunk A, including Hibbard Creek. So some of Marilyn's favorite childhood memories, which I'm sure we're going to hear some about tonight, are staying with her grandparents, Fred and Gertrude Erskine, who lived at the Jacksonport Post Office. For every season of the year, they took her with them on their daily walks, either in the woods, at the creek, or along the beach. Now, Marilyn and I share something in common because both of our granddaughters are here with us tonight and enjoying some of those same activities and starting their memories with their grandparents. So maybe they'll be up here presenting someday about their trips to Door County. So the Door County Land Trust now owns land at Heins Creek and at Hibbard Creek. Marilyn has co-led many hikes at both of these locations. She's written 2 Door County books, The Heins Creek Story, Fred Erskine, WW1 veteran, and she's writing Jacksonport history through the Erskine family stories as well. So not only a published author, but also an artist, as she's brought some of her inspirational cards to share with you tonight. So if you'd like to look at those later, she has some of those for sale. Unfortunately, her book is out of print, so we'll just have to find a copy and share it as we can. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Marilyn.
And of course, everything that worked isn't going to work. Oh my goodness. Yep, it was working. Okay. And the problem is, normally when I teach it, it's a 2-hour class. And I had to squeeze it into 45 minutes. So there are going to be a lot of times that I'm going to have to pause and just not say everything I wanted to say. Okay. Okay, we'll figure out a different way to do it. Can you hear me? Yeah. The microphone's okay? Okay, well, nothing is going to work. Okay, let's start over. Yeah, no, I've got to start over and, okay. Let's try it. Okay. Thank you, Lord. If the land could talk, it would have so many stories to tell. It would tell about the early inhabitants, archaeological artifacts, the Hein family history, the flow of water into Heins Creek, the geology of Door County, the role of suckers in Heins Creek, the legacy of 15 families in Bailey's Harbor, and how everything flows together in this ever-changing system. Since the land can't talk in words, I'm going to tell you the stories. Oops. The stories include you, the people who now enjoy and appreciate Door County. We are all part of the dynamic story being told by Heins Creek, the Door County Peninsula, and the Great Lakes. My amazing journey into the history of Heins Creek began in 2015 after I retired from working full-time. It began with my first hike at Heins Creek, which was led by Mike Madden and Lucy Klug. The group formed a circle at the parking lot. When we introduced ourselves, I was so proud to say that my great-grandparents, William and Wilhelmina Hein, that the creek was named after them. I knew very little about Heins Creek or the family history on the land. I soon learned that the past is always with us in the present. This statement was in an article published by the Milwaukee Public Museum. It began, "To know about a past for which there are no written records, physical remains must be studied in an orderly way. As with any science, this field is continually changing as new discoveries are made and new ideas are developed." Well, I'll begin with stories about the early inhabitants in Door County. Archaeological evidence confirms that not long after the retreat of the last glacier in Wisconsin, humans lived on the Door County Peninsula. They found more physical evidence in Door County than anywhere in Wisconsin. To study the evidence in an orderly way, archaeologists named the Door County cultures the early woodland, middle woodland, and late woodland groups. The early woodland group from 700 to 300 BC is marked by the earliest known Wisconsin pottery. As they studied the development of pottery and cultivated plants, they determined that there were periods of rapid cultural change. The Native Americans built their villages along Lake Michigan because it was easier for them to fish, hunt, and move to take advantage of seasonal resources. As populations increased, there is evidence that competition for hunting area and good agricultural lands led to increased conflict between groups. Two separate teams of archaeologists gathered evidence of the earlier inhabitants by excavating the sand dunes at Heins Creek. The first researchers were amateur naturalists George Fox and J.P. Schumacher. In 1918, they reported that the Heins Creek site was the largest site of artifacts on the peninsula. Unfortunately, after this report, relic hunters mutilated the area and looted great numbers of artifacts. The second archaeological excavation began in 1960. A team from Green Bay Neville Museum, directed by Ronald Mason, he was then curator of anthropology, and his wife Carol, discovered the sites of several large Indian villages on both sides of Heins Creek. The surface was still littered with flint chips, small potsherds, scraps of bones, and occasional stone tools that were dropped by migrating sand dunes. In some places, the flint flakes were over a foot deep, which showed where arrow point makers had workshop sites. A book written in 1917 by Halmer Holland confirms that there were several large American Indian villages along the shore of Lake Michigan on both sides of Heins Creek. These villages, most likely the largest on the peninsula, adjoined each other for about 1/2 mile. The largest village was north of the creek, where it was protected on the east by Lake Michigan and on the north and west by a swamp. I'm just going to double check the sound. How is the sound? Okay. It was difficult to determine stratification in many dunes because over the years, wind and water erosion shifted the deposits of sand, gravel, and cobble beaches. However, the Neville Museum team discovered this undisturbed stratified site that had been protected in a small, stabilized dune just above the storm beach. The height of the dune and the location suggested that the lake may have been at an unusually high water stage during part of the woodland cultural sequence on the peninsula, or it may have been deposited during an unusually severe storm. The Neville team worked in a stabilized dune. They only went down to the cobble layer in a stratified site. Permission to excavate had not included destabilizing the dune or bulldozing down to lake level. The Neville team excavated the sand dune using a step trench technique. They found stone tools and weapons, a large collection of flint chippage, projectile points, biface tools, a drill, scrapers, and knives. They also found stone and bone tools, including needles, a square-ended pin, harpoons, and instruments probably used in net weaving. Similar deposits were uncovered at other sites on the peninsula. What the Neville team did not know at the time of their work was that 8 years earlier, beginning in 1952, as a hobby, archaeologist Edward Wells had been secretly making extensive excavations. Although he did not have permission, he even went below the cobble beach into undisturbed deposits. In 1966, Wells published an article in the Wisconsin Archaeologist. The good news is that he gave his collection, mostly pottery, to Lawrence University in Appleton, where Ronald Mason was teaching. Carol Mason studied Wells' information and believes that the artifacts he recovered were from Middle Woodland occupation. Mason determined that Native Americans lived at Heins Creek before the higher dune developed and before the high lake level deposited the cobble beach on top of the initial dunes. I was excited to discover that 2 museums display artifacts from the Heins Creek site. In Sturgeon Bay, the Door County Historical Museum has an excellent collection. I recommend it. The display contains artifacts from the early and middle woodland periods. This display contains artifacts from the late woodland period at Heins Creek. Side note, in the 1950s, I often stayed with my grandparents, Fred and Gertrude Erskine in Jacksonport. I remember finding arrowheads when I was playing outside. I didn't understand back then that I was holding a significant piece of Door County history in my hand. Why were the Native Americans drawn to the Lake Michigan side of Door County? First, the temperature difference. On the lake side, summers, as we know, are cooler and winters are milder because of the lakeshore ecology. In summer, the cold water of Lake Michigan brings cooler onshore winds, and that makes it 15 to 25 degrees cooler than the other side of the peninsula. In winter, the lake transfers heat from the water to the winds. This can't happen on the colder bay side in winter because the bay freezes over, which prevents heat loss to the air. Second, travel on land would have been difficult. The peninsula was a rugged wilderness with no roads. The only trails were made by generations of Indian tribes, so they would have come by water. Then, as now, offshore waters can frequently and suddenly become rough, and the rocky shoals are dangerous in a storm. Heins Creek would have been a safe haven in a storm. Third, evidence shows that there was an abundant food supply. In the 1960s, archaeologist Charles Cleland, who was with the University of Michigan, conducted research on the remains of burned and unburned bones at Heins Creek. It revealed that the early inhabitants ate species that are either still present in Door County or recently extinct. Many bones were of migratory birds that passed through. Many bones were from fish and meat from different mammals, turtles, and birds. Other archaeological studies of animal bones, preserved plant remains, and tools showed that the Native Americans in northern Wisconsin relied on hunting in the winter and fishing in the summer. Another museum that displays a collection of Heins Creek artifacts is the Neville Public Museum in Green Bay. You can view pieces of Heins Creek pottery sherds in the main gallery exhibit called On the Edge of the Inland Sea. After that first hike, Lucy Klug asked me if I knew what crops my great-grandparents grew on their land. I had no answers. She enthusiastically told me what she had discovered about the land owned by the Hein family, and she invited me to her house. She showed me this 1899 Door County Atlas. The 1899 atlas showed the location, W. Hein, 3 lots in Section 6, town of Bailey's Harbor, along Lake Michigan. Lucy's passion for history was contagious. As soon as she gave me the treasure trove of old newspaper articles on the Hein family, I knew I had to write the Heins Creek story. The Hein family's story began in Germany. William was born in 1856. His father had died, so they were very poor. William shared a bed with his brothers, August and Fred. His mother decided that they should move to the United States in hopes of finding a better life. She had to receive official permission to leave from Otto von Bismarck, the Prime Minister of Germany. His mother framed that and kept it on the wall in her kitchen. Well, the boat left in July of 1866. Family members passed on stories of the dangerous trip, storms at sea, people dying of plague, and no option other than to throw their bodies overboard. They remembered hearing that 10-year-old William didn't like the man his mother met on the boat. Well, his mother married Mr. John Sant on their trip to America. Mr. Sant told the boys, "Now I'm the boss of the family." Well, the end of the trip was a new beginning, which began with their joy over seeing the Statue of Liberty as the ship approached what was then Bedloe Island, renamed Liberty Island in 1956 in New York Harbor. The Statue of Liberty is a symbol of freedom and opportunity for working men and women. She holds high the symbol of hope that light will always triumph over darkness. The family settled on a farm in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, but when William heard that a logging camp in Door County was looking for help, he went to Bailey's Harbor. He stayed there until he met Wilhelmina Pales in Algoma, Wisconsin. She was born in 1860 in Wauwatosa, but her parents were from Germany. They settled in Wauwatosa and then moved to Tornado. Anybody remember the history of Tornado? It was a town, it had been named Williamsville before a devastating windstorm in 1871, and that windstorm carried fire across the bay from Peshtigo and destroyed the town. William and Wilhelmina were married in 1882. Records show that before the wedding, William purchased property in Forestville Township. And I've already told you that 3 years later, William and Wilhelmina moved to Bailey's Harbor. They moved here with a toddler, Bertha, and a baby, my grandfather, Charles. From the newspapers, I learned that in 1886, William Hein moved his small family from a farm in Forestville to begin a new business venture in Bailey's Harbor. An entry published in the 1890 newspaper reported that William Hein purchased the Brash Pier property at Bailey's Harbor, and he expected to open a stone quarry. The Heinz story is one of perseverance, endurance, and hope. We can only imagine the hardships the young couple, William 30 and Wilhelmina 26, suffered during the move from Forestville to Door County in 1886. They were fortunate that the Postal Service had cleared a trail northward from Sturgeon Bay to Bailey's Harbor in 1859 for mail delivery. But the roads were just dirt ruts where trees had been cleared. Only horse-drawn buggies, sleds, and sleighs could travel along these primitive roads. In November 1906, after 18 years of renting, William Hein purchased the 3 lots. He paid $162 at an administrator's sale of the James Keeg estate. I couldn't find any more information on the pier or the quarry, but in my search, I learned some interesting history about Bailey's Harbor, and I know some of it is on that, I don't know what to call it, right downtown, where you can go up and sit high and overlook the water, and they have a plaque there that in 1848, Captain Justice Bailey needed to escape a storm on Lake Michigan, so he sailed his schooner into a safe harbor. When he returned to Milwaukee, he convinced the ship's owner, Milwaukee industrialist Alanson Sweet, that the harbor he found was an especially beautiful place. Sweet bought 125 acres of land with plans to develop a community. He opened the stone quarry, and built a pier and a lighthouse. Sweet gave up on his dream and abandoned the area. Nevertheless, a few people settled around the harbor, including my great-grandparents. These early settlers would be pleased to see how well Bailey's Harbor has grown and flourished beyond what they ever could have envisioned. I have a side note. I am wondering, could that quarry and pier have been the business my great-grandfather purchased? If anyone knows anything about it, please talk to me after. These photos are from the 2018 calendar for the 125th anniversary celebration of Emmanuel Lutheran Church. In 1891, 15 families pooled their resources to build a church in Bailey's Harbor. William cut lumber from his property and gathered stones from his fields for the foundation. And if I have time at the end, I have more about Emmanuel Lutheran Church and the families. My great-grandfather would have gone to John Anclam's General Store in Bailey's Harbor to get his mail and supplies. The post office, which opened in 1860, was in the building on the left in the photo. It was an addition to the store, but it was unheated space. So in winter, the post office counter was moved into the heated store. When William traveled to Sturgeon Bay by horse and buggy, he would have gone through Jacksonport, where my other set of great-grandparents, Lincoln and Carolyn Erskine, lived in the Jacksonport post office. Lincoln was postmaster. This photo of Jacksonport in the early 1900s was taken by my grandfather, Fred Erskine, with a camera he built in 1910, when he was 20, from parts he ordered from the Sears and Roebuck catalog. In 1914, the much-needed Highway 17, now Highway 57, was built to replace the rutted, muddy, sometimes almost impassable road north along the lakeside. According to a July 3, 1914 newspaper article, William Hein defiantly stood in the way of the county highway construction crew as they began to build the road through his land. The county commissioner, H.A. Wagner, had him arrested on a charge of making threats against that official and the road foreman, Al Osmondson. The reporter wrote, Mr. Hein, when arraigned before Judge Reynolds, their spelling was atrocious, pleaded guilty and was placed under bonds of $500 to keep the peace for 60 days. In addition to footing the cost of the legal proceeding, it amounted to $19.50. It appears that Mr. Hein had been paid for the right-of-way through this certain portion of his land through which a strip of new road was to be built to straighten the old highway. However, he had grain growing on his right-of-way, which he claimed was not the strip for which the county had paid him, and his hostilities were based on what he considered a claim for $25 damages to his crop of grain. He lost. In a June 25, 1920 newspaper article, the Door County of Chambers said that hotel accommodations are inadequate and they want the visitors to keep coming. They asked county residents to register if they had rooms available to rent to visitors for the summer. Another news article reported that on 4th of July holiday, the Hein family entertained 25 tourists at their home. Sounds like the beginning of a bed and breakfast. Bailey's Harbor designed a brochure extolling the desirability of vacationing in Bailey's Harbor. Leanne, and I'm not sure how to pronounce her last name, Despotes, in Bailey's Harbor, has the original brochure, which shows this picture of William Hein. A caption under the picture reads, Curiosity Rock, on William Hein's farm near Bailey's Harbor. Leanne scanned the original brochure. My timer quit. This is a piece of history that would be lost if she had not saved the brochure. Even though the images are not the best quality, I'm hoping you see the value, as I do, in sharing them. I wonder how many they mailed. Then the Great Depression hit in 1929. Construction was halted in many countries. Farming communities in rural areas suffered as crop prices fell by 60%. Areas that depended on industries such as logging suffered the most for the next 10 years. Nevertheless, The Bailey's Harbor farmers stuck together and supported each other. William needed more farmland. Believe it or not, he gave away 2,000 feet of Lake Michigan shoreline. He explained, "It's too rocky for farming." In an interview, Florian Koterski reminisced, "The cheese factory that was located where the Peninsula Pulse office is now could only buy so much milk every morning. Whatever came in first, there was quite a race coming to town." This photo represents an amazing surprise that inspired the second edition of my book. The first time I co-led a hike at Heins Creek, I sat on, I'll go back to tell the story. I sat on the bench that's in the shade of that old sheltering white pine tree, and I showed the few photos I had of William Hein and the family. I said, "I so wish I had a picture of their home." Then I began to name William and Minnie's 6 children. Wilhelmina was always called Minnie. As soon as I said Bertha, a man in the group called out, "That's my grandmother." So that's how I met my second cousin, Gary Stenzel, and the story gets even better. My newfound cousin, Gary, and his wife, Sue, introduced me to another cousin, Amy Witzlip. She invited me to her home near Milwaukee to meet more cousins on the Hines side of my family. They showed me photographs they had of our great-grandparents, which included photos of the original Hein home. That was such an amazing blessing. Those old newspaper articles Lucy Klug had printed really helped me get to know my great-grandparents. Back then, the news included stories about daily activities, and it helped people stay in touch with each other. Many stories reported who visited the Hein family at their home and how long visitors stayed. They told about William going to Sturgeon Bay to buy a new cutter, and William cutting trees and hauling them to Sturgeon Bay to sell for lumber. One article reported that Minnie had the church ladies' aid meeting at their home. Another reported that Mrs. William Hein enjoyed an afternoon ladies' aid meeting at Cana Island. I just thought that's neat. I love Cana Island. I learned that William was an assessor and a justice of the peace from 1916 to 1926, and then again in 1929 until his death in 1931. Newspaper articles reported about times they spent with family and friends, or that they had family for weekends. Whoops, I didn't intend to repeat that. Work on the farm was hard work, and everyone in the family helped. They raised cows, sheep, and chickens. They planted vegetables and grain, which he stored in the granary. They made maple syrup in the spring. William and Minnie's daughter, Wilhelmina, married Herman Willman. They had 2 children. Tragedy struck the Willman family when the flu pandemic swept through the country. Their daughter died at age 26. Her daughter, Lucille Willman, went to live with her grandparents, William and Minnie. Lucille's brother Archie lived with her father. Tragedy struck the family again when Archie, 19, was killed in a car accident on Bayshore Drive. And the band played on. This page and the next one are from a collection of photos the family had creatively arranged. I'm so grateful that a family member created these memories. None of the Hein children moved very far away. Bertha, Charles, and Wilhelmina stayed in Door County. Frank lived in Appleton and had a shoe repair shop on College Avenue. Otto lived in Manitowoc. Their youngest, Walter, lived the farthest away in Janesville. I wonder which family member painted this picture of the Hein home at Heins Creek. This is the Bailey's Harbor census, just checking the time. April 1st, 1930. A year before William died. I know this is hard to read, but I wanted to include it because of the story it tells about the year 1930, long before computers changed our world. And if someone wants to talk to me afterward, I do have listed the names that are on here, the family names. William and Minnie lived on the Heins Creek property until William died in 1931 at the age of 74. They had been married 48 years. In December, 1932, a year and a half after William died, Minnie, 72, moved to Jacksonport with her granddaughter, Lucille. They lived in the building that's now the Craft Cottage in Jacksonport. My daughter Treva and I searched for over an hour trying to find my great-grandparents' tombstone in the cemetery on that hill just above Bailey's Harbor. We finally gave up and headed to the car, and all of a sudden she said, "Here it is." We found it. So I am just checking the time. I don't know how much longer can I go. I'm fine? Okay, because it's going to be another half hour. Is that okay? I'll begin the story of the creek by taking you on a hike through photos. I think that most of you are familiar with the entrance to the small parking lot. Well, when you see the Land Trust sign, you may wonder, as I did, why doesn't the name have an apostrophe? It took some research to discover that over 130 years ago, the U.S. Postal Department got frustrated over their grammatical challenge caused by apostrophes, when to use one in addresses, when to not use one. So, in 1892, President Teddy Roosevelt decided that place names needed to be standardized. The government mandated that the apostrophe be dropped from addresses and signage. However, many sources still cite the name with an apostrophe. The land closest to the creek now belongs to the Door County Land Trust. If you go left up the hill, the trail leads you along the sand dunes. If you choose to go to the right, the trail leads you to the creek. Either way, you have 74 protected acres to enjoy as you follow the 3/4-mile looped hiking trail. I'll be taking you to the left. As soon as you reach the top of the first hill, you'll see an exposed, wind-blown section of partially stabilized sand dunes. Some of the sand dunes have been anchored in place by vegetation. Their roots help the sand cling to the crests and flanks. Some of the sand dunes are still migrating, especially when they're blown by wind and pelted by rain. When I co-led a hike there in May with Mike Madden, I was surprised by the extent of the sand migration just since last year. The trail leads you to the crest of a sand dune. Looking to the north, you'll see this red-roofed granary. It was built by my great-grandfather in early 1900. The granary is the only original building that remains. The granary is not on Door County Land Trust property, but the owner gave me permission to go inside to take pictures. The granary is an amazing glimpse into the past. William sawed down trees from his property, cut them into 6-inch lengths, and as he stacked them lengthwise, he filled the gaps with mortar made from sand and limestone. That cement lasts indefinitely. The granary was used to store grain and other supplies. The 6-inch thick insulation protected the food from the cold winter winds and small animals. Not very far along the trail, you come to this bench overlooking the field. It beckons you to stop and sit in the shade of that majestic old white pine. I love that tree. When you continue your hike, the trail curves south and you enter the boreal forests of hemlock, balsam fir, sugar maple, yellow birch, and white spruce. This type of forest is found only along the northeastern coast of the Door Peninsula because of the unique moderate climate along the lake shore. It grows in loamy clay, sand, and silt soil deposited by the glaciers. This environment nurtures a rich understory of flowering plants that appeal to migratory birds and delights hikers. The trail takes another turn, and soon you hear the soothing sounds of water, except when the water is very low during a dry summer. Unfortunately, when the weather gets warmer, you will also encounter many pesky mosquitoes, so be prepared. You'll come to a bench at the creek. The family that donated it in memory of a loved one had this haiku poem inscribed on the bench. Cooled here in deep shade, Heins Creek flows past old sand dunes east to find lake shore. It was so neat a year ago, when I led the hike there. The woman who was responsible for having that bench put there, and the haiku poem was actually on the hike. Bring your children and grandchildren to Heins Creek. Laugh with them as they squeal with delight over seeing trout parr flash through the water. Parr are trout that are less than a year old. Since Heins Creek is a Class 2 trout stream, you might even see someone fishing. A low water level has its own natural rhythm in the dynamic story of the creek. Listen as it gently ripples over rocks and fallen branches. And watch for a resident bird like the kingfisher to hover over the water before plunging headfirst to snag a fish. In spring and fall, you'll be thrilled by the calls of birds flying overhead as they follow the lakeshore migration corridor year after year. How did Door County form as a peninsula? Have you ever wondered what earth processes formed this narrow peninsula we call the Door County Peninsula? There are two theories, evolution and creation. Both theories converge at the point where the glaciers enter the picture. A tropical sea covered Wisconsin until the Ice Age. As the earth cooled, glaciers covered 1/3 of Earth's surface. When the snow stopped, the earth warmed and the ice began to melt. Separate lobes of glaciers carved out the landforms and the shoreline in Wisconsin. When this area of North America was the basin of a tropical sea, rocks were forming at the bottom of the sea. Sand deposits formed beds of sandstone, mud deposits formed soft shale, shellfish skeletons gradually formed a hard limestone. The limestone was transformed when a chemical reaction occurred between the calcium carbonate, the lime, of the shells and liquid magnesium. Magnesium ions replaced the calcium ions in the calcite, creating dolomite, the hard, resistant layer of magnesium calcium carbonate that we're so familiar with. Through uplift, weathering, and erosion, glaciers 1 to 2 miles thick gouged out the soft shale and left harder limestone exposed. After the glaciers receded, the hollowed out areas shaped the Great Lakes, the world's largest single supply of fresh water. The glaciers also created the landform called the Niagara Escarpment. This geologic formation, the Red Arc, shapes the Great Lakes from Illinois to New York. The edges in the southern half of Wisconsin and into Illinois are below ground. In Door County, the escarpment is on the Green Bay side of the peninsula, the western side. Exposed dolomitic rock rises 200 to 250 feet high in some places, like the Ellison Bay Bluff. The rest of the peninsula is called a cuesta, that's Spanish for the slope of a hill. It slopes downward to the east at a 3-degree tilt toward Lake Michigan. I joke and say that's why I lose my balance all the time, because it's tilting. On the Lake Michigan side of the Door County Peninsula, there are many shallow inland lakes. These lakes are remnants of glacial bays or embayments that were once open to the waters of Lake Michigan. Over time, waves and shore currents deposited sand dunes that connected land areas. The narrow strip of land that connects two larger land masses and separates the embayment into two bodies of water is an isthmus. An isthmus separated the lake that we now call Kangaroo Lake from Lake Michigan. The tilt of the land enabled water to continue flowing southeast along the fracture toward Lake Michigan, creating the creek that we now call Heins Creek. The Ridges Sanctuary is located on the north end of the Bay of Bailey's Harbor. Much of the 1,400 acres is made up of a series of low, sandy ridges deposited by the action of waves and shore currents as the lake level changed over time. It was once 60 feet higher than it is today. The action of waves and shore currents also gave Door County the Whitefish Bay sand dunes and the sand dunes at Heins Creek. How did people get to Wisconsin after the Ice Age? God created the first humans, I believe, in the area known as the Mid-East. As the population grew, people searched for other places to live. People groups spread out across Asia and into Africa and Europe. At the end of the Ice Age, some traveled over the Bering Land Bridge that connected Siberia to North America. This land bridge had been exposed by lower sea levels, but it's now submerged in the Bering Strait. People traveled to Wisconsin from the west and south. The groups populated the continent and diversified both genetically and culturally. In the Great Lakes region, the forest-edged tundra moved northward as glaciers continued to melt, allowing conifer forests to grow in northern Wisconsin. Humans adapted to continuing changes in the environment as the climate became warmer and drier. They hunted big game animals along the old lake shore and on high areas in river and stream valleys. They appear to have been nomadic, moving frequently to follow animal migrations and meet other groups to trade with. So the earliest people groups didn't leave many artifacts. That explains why we don't have a lot of information out about the very earliest inhabitants of Wisconsin. After I wrote the first edition of the Heins Creek story in 2016, I began to wonder, well, where does the water come from that flows into Heins Creek? The answer to my question can be summarized in one sentence. Everything is connected, and everything flows together. And it begins with all that happened in the past, which in turn affects how we live in the present, which in turn impacts the future. How does it answer my question about where the water comes from before it flows into Heins Creek? Well, the story begins at the foundation, the bedrock of Door County. This picture of bedrock is just past Jacksonport at a wayside on Highway 57 near the intersection of Lagerquist Road. It's halfway between the equator and the North Pole, as I pointed out to my granddaughter Evelyn on the way here. You can see the fractures in the exposed bedrock. This is an example of karst topography, which developed over time as water dissolved the dolomitic rock and created fractures, sinkholes, and caves in Door County. These cracks and solution channels form an underground drainage network that rapidly transports surface water and pollutants to groundwater. The word is, and the pollutants. Everything quickly drains into the groundwater because Door County lacks surface soil. Contaminated water enters the wetlands and streams through fractures in the dolomitic rock. Contaminated water affects the quality of life for all living things, for all of us, from the tiny fairy shrimp in our wetlands to the quality of drinking water in our wells. In Door County, groundwater can move as much as 100 feet or more per day. Compare this areas with a natural soil filtration system where groundwater typically moves less than 1 foot per day. Oh, I'm going to take a side note before I say the last thing here. On one of the nature hikes I went on, I learned that years ago, the earliest settlers would throw a dead cow into the sinkhole on their property. They had no understanding of how quickly that contaminated the water. So here we go. Eventually, this groundwater resurfaces at a spring, a wetland, a river, or a lake. This was my first aha moment. The groundwater resurfaces at a spring or a wetland. Could the water flowing into Heins Creek begin at a wetland? The next aha sprang up when I studied a topographical map of the area. I began to see how everything is interconnected in our very fragile ecosystem. First, I discovered there is a spring-fed marl fen, which is a unique type of wetland. It's east of County Road A and 5 miles upstream from Pile Creek. I realized that this upper Door County watershed supplies water for Pile Creek. The gentle slope of the Cuesta directs the flow of water in Pile Creek southeast along bedrock fractures for 2.39 miles. On its way, it flows through a culvert under County Road EE. Then Pile Creek flows into the northwest end of Kangaroo Lake. Well, that was the answer to my question. The water flowing into Heins Creek begins in a wetland. In March, melting snow, rainwater, and small springs fill the headwater wetland. This increases the flow of water for Pile Creek. I remembered seeing a sign for Pile Creek, so I went in search of the place where Pile Creek runs through the culvert under County Road EE. Curiosity got the best of me when I noticed different spellings of the name Pile, P-I-E-L and P-E-I-L, in different sites and on the official internet sites. So that began another side trip as my search to learn about the family that creek is named after. As is true with many Door County families, the story of the Pyle family dates back almost 150 years. Carl and Augusta Pyle and 5 of their children came from Germany and settled on a farm in Bailey's Harbor. Many Pyle families have lived in the area since then, and with the spelling of their name, reading old newspaper articles, almost everybody's name was spelled differently different times. Pyle Creek meanders south through the Kangaroo Lake Nature Preserve, a state natural area owned by the Nature Conservancy and the Door County Land Trust. Kangaroo Lake is a half-mile from the Lake Michigan coast. Here was another answer to my question. At the southeast end of the lake, the water exits into Heins Creek. But before the water exits Kangaroo Lake into Heins Creek, another dynamic part of the story unfolds. It all flows together to create a healthy environment for all living things. Water flowing from Pyle Creek raises the water level in Kangaroo Lake. Strong winds move from the north, do their part to push the high water toward the southeast end of the lake. As the water flows from the northern section of the lake, it passes through culverts under the causeway. The causeway is another part of the story. This old postcard shows a view of the log bridge that was built across Kangaroo Lake in 1884. It replaced a Pioneer-era log bridge built in 1868. The replacement of the Pioneer-era bridge caused a fair amount of political turmoil in Bailey's Harbor in the early 1880s. And note the misspelling of Bailey's Harbor. The current causeway, built in 1927, helps to preserve the undeveloped northern section, where marshes are filled with bulrushes, wire sedge, and water lilies. This vegetation provides habitat for migratory birds, sandhill cranes, waterfowl, and the endangered Heinz emerald dragonfly. The story continues to unfold. Now that I learned that the overflow from Kangaroo Lake enters Heins Creek at the southeast end of the lake, I wanted to see what it looked like at the actual place where it flows into Heins Creek. I located Bower's Old Dam Lane on a map. A friend was with me. She saw a sign that said private property. I couldn't find anyone to give me permission, but I wanted to see where the road went. It was a very narrow, one-lane road. I ended up trapped. A water-filled ditch was on each side. I was too afraid to back up. My friend got out of the car and guided me, backward, forward, inch by inch. Not long after that, I fell and broke my leg. I wanted to finish writing the second edition of the Heins Creek story. How could I find out what it looked like where the water enters Heins Creek? Well, my adventurous Egg Harbor cousin, Gary Stenzel, and his wife Sue offered to help. They found a landowner who gave them permission to be on the property. This is a photo of the very place where water flows from Kangaroo Lake into Heins Creek. I had no idea there was a dam holding back the flow from Kangaroo Lake. Well, now I wanted to learn more about the dam. A historian at the Door County Historical Museum came to the rescue. He found this newspaper article. The first dam was built about 1922. It had a 30-foot spillway, but it was too narrow, constantly leaked and developed holes. In 1927, owners of the 30 cottages on the lake complained that the water level was too low. Unfortunately, the dam was on private property. The owner said that before he would allow repairs, the township had to remove branches and down trees from the creek. So in 1927, the township cleared down trees and branches from the creek. The water flow to the lake improved and the dam was repaired, but it continued to deteriorate and leak. By 1932, the dam needed to be replaced. The owner did not want a new dam, Finally, 2 years later, the owner sold the land to the Bailey's Harbor Township and Land Trust. It took 3 more years to raise money for a new dam. This was during the bleakest years of the Great Depression, the severe worldwide economic depression between 1929 and 1939. Massive numbers of people lived in poverty. In 1935, President Roosevelt created an ambitious employment and infrastructure program, the Works Project Administration, which we know as WPA. In January of 1937, while the water level was down and the lake was frozen, a WPA crew began the project, but work on the dam was halted. Another article told a lengthy story of a year of frustrations and delays. Eventually, they built a temporary road from Highway 57 to the dam. They had to cover the muddy road with layers of bark from cedar trees so they could bring in supplies and a tent for the workers. Finally, during the winter of 1938, a crew of 34 men worked in 2 shifts to construct a new dam with a 50-foot spillway. They expected this dam to last 10 to 20 years without repairs. Guess what? It's been almost 85 years, and the dam is still functioning well. The dynamic story continued to unfold. As the water flows over the dam, it descends about 20 feet on its way to Lake Michigan, which is about a half-mile away. The creek meanders through acres of forest and an ancient sand dune. For a week or 2 in spring, snowmelt and rain increase the flow of water. The cascading water causes the creek to overflow its banks, flooding the land on each side of the creek. The rapid current digs out the outside banks. This creates deeper pockets in the sand and gravel at the curves, and it exposes tree roots. This provides more places for fish to spawn and to hide. As the water recedes, though, it does leave a wide swath of muck, which makes it challenging to hike in the area. Well, now I wanted to know what it looked like where Heins Creek runs into Lake Michigan. Since access to the mouth of Heins Creek is on private property, since my grandfather gave it away, my adventurous cousin Gary and his wife Sue offered to go kayaking along the shore to take pictures. They were surprised to see that partially buried remains of a shipwreck. They learned that the ship was a wooden 2-masted schooner named Illinois. She was built in 1848 in St. Joseph, Michigan to transport lumber. Her final voyage ended during the gale of October 29, 1873. Over the years, as the high lake level deposited sand and cobble beach, creating new shoreline, it buried most of the remains of the shipwreck. Here's another really interesting part. The ecological role of suckers in Heins Creek. Bird lovers will enjoy Heins Creek, but in the spring, most visitors are drawn to Heins Creek to see the fish spawning. As the hours of daylight increase in March and the water temperature goes up, fish leave the colder waters of Lake Michigan and enter the mouth of Heins Creek to swim upstream. Different species have their own timetable for spawning, depending upon the water temperature each requires. The first fish to swish their way upstream are rainbow trout, eager to begin their spring mating ritual. If the fish you see are actively chasing each other, they are rainbow trout, because suckers prefer to hang out in one spot. When trout spawn, the female flips onto her side and shines like silver in the clear water. I just got this picture last month. I was so glad. I also got a video of it, but for some reason it wouldn't download. So at least you have this picture. A couple of weeks after the trout spawn, thousands of long-nosed suckers take their cue from the fast-moving water and the rising water temperature, and they swim upstream into Heins Creek in search of their favorite spawning ground, a gravel bottom. The suckers that return every year to Heins Creek are the long-nosed suckers. They are easy to recognize because of their protruding lips. Since the sucker's mouth is on the bottom of its nose, it's like a vacuum cleaner as it sucks in aquatic insects, small mollusks, algae, and crustaceans. During spawning season, the long-nosed sucker can be identified by a reddish stripe that appears on the male's body. The dorsal, the upper side is dark olive, the underside is creamy white. You would see water splashing when the male vibrates to broadcast sperm as the female is releasing her tiny white eggs. Females can spawn between 16,000 and 60,000 eggs. The barely visible egg sinks into the spaces between the rocks and loose gravel. Depending upon water temperature, it takes 7 to 15 days for the eggs to hatch. The fry, also called hatchlings, are tiny and stay in the gravel for about 2 weeks. Adult suckers only stay in Heins Creek a short time, about 7 to 10 days. Suckers don't die after spawning like salmon do. After they mature, which is when they are about 5 years old, they return to spawn every year. The oldest sucker recorded was over 20 years old. Contrary to a popular myth, suckers do not eat trout eggs, and there is no evidence to show that suckers damage or outcompete trout for resources. The fishermen who were there when I went recently said they have never seen as many trout in Heins Creek as there are now. My grandmother used to say, those are just suckers. Well, now I understand that those humble, bottom-feeding suckers play a major role in the ecological health of the Great Lakes and all of the creeks here that connect to them. Everyone benefits. The entire food chain is healthier when suckers are abundant. After a long winter, the nutrients in the creek are depleted. Excrement from the thousands of suckers fertilizes the creek by adding nitrogen and phosphorus. This provides abundant food for trout in the creek because these nutrients increase algae growth and supply food for aquatic bugs. Suckers also keep the water cleaner, which the trout and the fishermen prefer. Dr. Karen Murchie, Director of Freshwater Research at Shedd Aquarium in Chicago, has been coming to Heins Creek in 2017 as part of her Great Lakes Research Program. She trains citizen scientists to assist with the research. During spawning season, these enthusiastic volunteers monitor the same location daily and use spreadsheets to log information on water depth, water clarity, weather conditions, presence of suckers, and estimates of their numbers. Dr. Murchie's research involves tracking suckers. They insert tiny microchips into the belly of 60 suckers each spring. The team is hoping to find answers to many questions about suckers. I asked Dr. Murchie the same questions they're asking. Where do these suckers go after the spawning season? Do they stay together? Do they return to the same creek every year? She explained that while many fishermen think of suckers as common, she is conducting this research to ensure that suckers stay common instead of becoming another endangered species. Thanks to her, I now understand that suckers hold a special place in the natural rhythm of nature. Should I stop now? The rest is about Emmanuel Lutheran Church. Okay. I will close this.
How many here in the audience have taken a hike at Heins Creek? Lots of you. And how many of you are Kangaroo Lake dwellers? So have you learned something new tonight? I've certainly learned a lot. Anyone?
Did you learn anything new?
Yes.
Oh, good.
Even Evelyn did. I know Alice was quite engrossed.
About that Heins Creek, so she didn't know anything.
Oh,
My wife Patty Waves wrote in her book about Heins Creek, and you had much more information.
Okay.
But she
Do you
passed
have
on.
your wife's book with you?
No.
You didn't bring it. Okay. Oh, I'd love to see it.
do we have any other questions from the audience
Okay.
right now? Well, certainly, again, preservation is very important. Oh, we have one here.
How did the S get on Heins Creek? Oh. How did the S get on Heins Creek?
How did the S get on Heins Creek? I think you mentioned about the removal of the apostrophe.
Right, yes. About 130 years ago, the government said, this is just too hard to know when to put an apostrophe in an address or on a sign. So they said no apostrophes in addresses or signage.
So it just remained Heins Creek rather than Heins Possessive Creek.
And yet you'll notice that Hibbard Creek has no S on it, but Heins, yeah. So,
Yeah.
well, at the Neville Museum, they have an apostrophe in the Heins Creek signage.
The same thing happened with Toft Point, and the story goes that Emma didn't believe that the land belonged to them, so it should never be Toft's Point. So she removed the apostrophe and S from the sign that's now at the Toft House. We haven't installed it yet, but we have it there. Anyway, please give Marilyn a big round of applause. And if you'd like to take a look at her book she has, or the card she has displayed, as we clean up, she'll have a few minutes to talk with you, I think. And
So someday there will be a third edition. So,
very good. But thank you all for coming. If you enjoyed it, please consider leaving a small donation to help defray the cost of the refreshments. Come back in July on the third Wednesday. We'll be exploring memories of Moonlight Bay. Kathleen Harris is going to lead kind of a group discussion and come and share memories that evening.
did you like it?